Bullshit.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. I'm Dave Mastovich of Massolutions, the world's only no bullshit marketing firm. Today, you'll hear from and about Mike Cherock, CEO of AE Works, an architectural engineering firm based in downtown Pittsburgh. AE Works has been recognized in a lot of ways. Smart Business 50, best places to work, top design firms, fastest growing companies. And Mike has also been honored as the prestigious Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year, Small Business Person of the Year, and Patriot of the Year. And I'm not talking about New England Patriots, so Pittsburghers don't go negative on him. He'll tell you more about that honor, too. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Let's get started. Everybody knows I always start with that first question. It's a trick question. Not. Tell me about your career path, your journey.
Well, how far back do you want to go?
Well, what molded you? What shaped you? What got you going in your career?
Really, I look at, boy, that's a big question. I mean, if I go back, at this stage of the game, I get pretty reflective about this stuff and look at those influences. And I would go all the way back to when I joined the service in the military. I mean, I grew up as a military brat. You know, my dad was career lifelong Navy guy. So I was born in Argentia, Newfoundland, Canada, in the middle of nowhere. Was on a remote outpost where we used to spy on Soviet stuff and kind of grew up, you know, with a father who had this kind of worldly view and really shaped and used to talk to me about the news. That was all during the Cold War era and things like that. And then I went into the military and I was in submarines and I was in the nuke program. And through the Navy nuclear program, if anybody knows anything about that, it's a pretty rigorous program. It's one of the more difficult special units within the military across all the branches. And so the exposure I got in that program is influential for, it has been for my whole career. Everything from the value of leadership and the type of leadership to the technical competency required to run a nuclear power plant. All those lessons that I learned during that time period still again influenced decision making that I do today. So I went through that. I was in about 7 years in submarines.
Wait, hold on a second on that. So two questions about this. So first, you're 18, 19, 20 years old and you're seeing leadership in a really serious form.
Yes.
Which many people aren't exposed to. Most people, if they're going right into college, or even if you're in college and come right out of college, you start at a job and maybe you're a lower level employee and there aren't as many leaders in the world as there is in military where you have a clear leader. So tell me a little bit about being exposed to leadership at a young age.
I mean, look, so I grew up, it was pretty humble. My dad, when he retired, he came back, was in the late 70s. And, I remember his first job was working at a gas station, pumping gas back when we used to have attendants that did that stuff. And my mom's a school bus driver. And so we grew up very humble in Penn Hills. My dad always kind of struggled a little bit after he got out of the military. So we had some, family type issues and stuff that we dealt with. And, I grew up just going to school like everybody else and, really didn't have any plans other than joining the military. I wasn't particularly good in high school or anything like that. But I was pretty good scientifically, oriented. And my dad, having been a career sailor, knew that there were these programs that were available that could really influence me as a young man. And so, I joined the nuke program. I remember the first class I was in, they said, look around, most people won't be here. It had a little over 70% failure rate. And as I watched, shipmates leave the program, through the rigors of that, it's about a 1.5 year long process. Concurrently with that, I was sitting next to officers who, graduated from the Naval Academy, who were selected for the nuke program. And it's well known in the military that's kind of the finest of the finest, especially. Submarine officers are, handpicked. And I was in, it was long enough ago where Rickover's effect was what they called it. Admiral Rickover, who created the nuclear Navy, his culture, his accountability culture and culture of integrity, which I'm sure is still true to this day. It's kind of held on for that long. There were sailors that I worked for, officers that I served under, who were influenced directly by Rickover himself. And so, I walk in as this, punk 18-year-old kid, and thrusted into this environment where the expectations were high, the accountability was high, and there was a belief that you could do it. Though that was the thing that I always found kind of very interesting. They weren't just putting up hurdles; they were putting up hurdles and saying, "This is how you get over them," and really left it up to you. And you just had to work at it. Most of the people I saw fell out of the new program didn't fail out because they weren't smart enough. They fell out because they didn't work hard enough. They fell out because they didn't listen well enough.
Hold on a second. Those are two absolutely huge things. We have to go down the path a little bit. The work hard enough one, I think young people have heard a lot, and you either do it or you don't. But I talk a lot about listening, so I want you to talk about that, what you just said. The second part is listening. Didn't listen enough.
Yeah, I think when we were instructed during the training phases of the program, that the instructors were very clear in the intent, and they actually employed something called verbatim repeat back in the Navy, in the nuclear Navy, something that again influences me to this day. I think prepared me very well as an entrepreneur, very well as a business person. That verbatim repeat back is what they call a listen, write, read, or listen, read, write method. So the instructor would say something, and you couldn't write down while they were talking, right? You had to sit. Everybody had to listen. Then they would write it on the board, and everybody wrote in their notes, and then they would repeat it again. So they could take this kid from Penn Hills, and they were teaching me reactor kinetics when I was 19 years old, and I got out of high school with barely a C average. And I was learning all the fundamentals of nuclear power through a read, write, read method, verbatim repeat back method, that not only, just did it through instruction, but as we became operators and it showed up at my first nuclear power plant and started operating that plant in a submarine, that they instilled that training into you. So what I learned was that if you listen to what they said, wrote down what it is they said, listened to it again, and used it, so you made the decision to believe it, then you were fine.
It's amazing. It's amazing because the breakdowns with companies across America, including mine and yours, with our internal teams, but also when we're talking with clients, and having coached sports and having taught in college and so forth, listening, it comes back to listening so much.
It really does. I mean, I feel like I have that conversation every day in my office. That we'll put something out in whatever form, right, through all hands meetings or using Slack and of course with clients, we're going out, we're designing buildings for a living and doing building consultation, and clients will say things, and I'm always on the alert for what was said and what was heard and the difference between those two. Right? So active listening, and there's all kinds of, schools of thought out there about active listening, is I believe probably one of the most critical skills that any consultant, really anybody could use, but in the consulting business is critical to success. So, I mean, all of those, I believe, it might sound somewhat ironic, but I think my training in the Navy in a confined space like a submarine was some of the best groundwork laid to be an entrepreneur.
Talk about that a little bit, because that is something I had in my notes to ask you, is tell our listeners what it's like to live on a submarine.
Well, I mean, it's, you blur the lines between, where you work, where you play, where you live, because it's all right there. So I think one of the things that's fundamental in terms of being able to make it as a submariner is that you can be yourself in front of your colleagues, in front of your shipmates, be professional at the same time, and knowing how to kind of deal with the stresses of that. So you can't get away from it. So you learn how to coexist, right? You learn how to work with people who grew up. I mean, one of the best, experiences beyond just the training I received as a Navy nuke was in submarines. I'm with people. I served with people who grew up in the middle of, Alabama, Texas, all over the country, and the backgrounds were so diverse. I've served with officers that had, the finest education that you can get, who were sons of senators, sitting right next to somebody who grew up in Alabama that used an outhouse to go to the bathroom and barely got out of high school. And we called them strikers. Some of these sailors, just all they wanted to do was be on a submarine. They didn't even have a job. So we have jobs on submarines that don't necessarily require a lot of technical skill, believe it or not. But over time, they would develop those technical skills. So I think what the life on a submarine is all about. Kind of an authentic. It's an authentic experience. There's no hiding.
How did it help you with entrepreneurship?
You should become comfortable in your own skin. I mean, I always use, I explain this to my staff, entrepreneurship, you have to be comfortable, like, undressing in front of people.
Ain't that the truth?
Right. You know what I mean? I mean, you're meeting clients, you're trying to, convince buyers to buy you and trying to convince talent to come and help you deliver that value. And it can be a very humbling experience. Because, you're also looking at the financial needs and talking to lenders and creditors and, institutions who want to understand why, you don't have your house paid off and it's the old saying, right? Banks only want to give you, an umbrella when it's sunny out. So, I mean, those kinds of experiences are very humbling and they get to your core fast. And what I felt was that I was very comfortable in my own skin as a very young man. And I'm not really too shy about, showing it all kind of thing, to be honest. I mean, it prepared me well.
Well, you have to, as an entrepreneur, it's a choice that you either, first of all, you mentioned the word humble. Getting humbled is pretty much on a daily basis. When I was in corporate America, I might get humbled by the top person in the company who knocked me down a peg or two. But other than that, I wasn't humbled very often. But I'm humbled every day at this company. And then the second thing is you either become vulnerable and be yourself, or you just don't achieve the growth you need. Because anytime I'm not completely myself and saying what I really fully believe, those are the times that we as a company get in trouble, because there was some ambiguity. And I have a phrase, ambiguity breeds mediocrity. And that's what ends up happening. Anytime I'm not myself and don't completely address something with a potential client, that's what ends up happening. So I agree with you. You have to be naked.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, the other thing I think is in that environment, what I learned was how I contributed to the problem, right? And I think that's one of the things that also on an everyday kind of business level, or just executing the business, that as entrepreneurs, we can do a lot of cool things and create value and start businesses and things like that. We can also screw them up. And I'm always looking to see how I might be contributing to the problem that we have, and try to instill that as a culture in the company. Human beings are very good at identifying problems. They're also very good at making it distinct from themselves. Right. And just kind of like the fundamental attribution error, which is everything that's good that's happened to me is because I did it. And everything that's bad happened to me is because somebody else did it. And it's just not reality. Yeah. And so the experience in submarines was very humbling in that way, because you saw where you may have contributed to a problem. And you were called out on it and held accountable to that. And you learned that that's not a bad thing. That's a very liberating thing, to be quite honest. And when you have the trust of, when you're relying on everybody around you to live, because the reality is one sailor on a submarine can kill everybody, and it doesn't take much to do that when you learn how submarines operate. You learn to appreciate kind of the authentic nature that is a human being, that they have many strengths, but they also have weaknesses. And to kind of look at your own weaknesses and have some humor about that, it makes, getting the job done that much easier. And in fact, I think it makes it the job that gets done a lot better job.
It's a part of leadership and teamwork is self-awareness and being able to admit your weaknesses and be vulnerable about them and try to find a way to focus mostly on your strengths. I'm with Mike Cherock of AE Works on the No BS Marketing Show. He's gone through an early part of his career path, his journey, and he was on a submarine 7 years. Tell me then what happens next and how we get to where we are today.
Yeah, so I go from the world, that world confined with, who I believe, I'm obviously biased, they're some of the best, leaders in the world, best people in the world. And I land on a college campus at Penn State, right? So I'm in my mid-20s, and I go from, a disciplined, accountable environment to the opposite. And fortunately, there was a veteran office there, and it was this guy Bill, who was an old Vietnam guy, was helping me navigate some of the challenges of that transition. But similarly to the nuke program, I went to school at Penn State. I did my undergrad and graduate degree in architectural engineering. I've always loved buildings because my dad eventually got into the building business, and I liked it. I liked the what it took to build the building. He was on the contracting side. So, after a few years, after he got out of the service and during that time period before I went to the Navy, he would take me to job sites and things like that. So I always liked buildings. And when I got out of the service, I wanted to use some of the skills that I had developed around, the technical aspects of submarines and a nuclear power plant specifically, and translate that somehow, but outside the nuclear world. I didn't want to get into nuclear power or can stay in nuclear power on the commercial side. So buildings seem to make a nice convergence, between a passion and my technical skills, and then obviously get the engineering to support becoming a professional engineer. So I finished my degree work. It's a great program. I got exposed to kind of, not expecting it, but it just happened that the AE program, you're getting exposure to architecture studio over many years. You're getting exposure to HVAC systems and electrical systems and plumbing systems and structures of buildings, very similar to what I was exposed to in the Navy, where I had an expertise. I was an electrician, made and operated the electrical portions of the nuclear power plant and the submarine. But I also had exposure to everything from firing systems on submarines to, specific to nuclear, the reactor controls and the mechanical systems. And so I always had a belief that, like you'll become a specialist at something. And to get really good at, to be the best at it, you really have to be aware of all the other disciplines that specialist interacts with. Buildings are complex. There's a lot of systems in them. So that training at Penn State was fantastic. I got out, and I worked for a couple firms. While I was doing all that, though, the thing that I can look back with some hindsight now and go, oh, that's why, is that all along I was starting things. So in college, for example, I had a multitude of businesses. Two of them, one of which still exists to this day. I created a training program for electricians in Centre County. Okay, and it was for the Centre County Electrical Contractors Association. What they found was in the rural part of the country without unions, that a lot of their electricians did not have the requisite kind of technical training and exposure. So there was something called a professional electricians program that I took and took some of the elements of it, kind of put in my own elements and created this program and taught electricians in Centre County for a number of years. Established great relationships with contractors and did this at night and throughout the year, and graduated a bunch of classes, taught them electrical theory, taught them electrical code, taught them leadership principles, green buildings. So I was taking some of the stuff I was learning while in college, but also what I had learned in the Navy, and taught and created that business. And then that business was picked up and is now at a technical school out of Wilkes-Barre, where it's being taught. So then the other thing I did was I started a construction company. And so what I noticed in the market up at Penn State, there wasn't a lot of there were a lot of small entities, but there wasn't any entities, and then there was large entities, wasn't anything in between. And there was a gap, in terms of just like residential and light construction. And I was making all these, building my network with all the electrical contractors, and some of which were fantastic electricians, but they were really small. So I just started an electrical construction company. And then what I would do is I would call up some of my students and say, hey, I marketed. So that was the other thing that a lot of people didn't market. So I marketed. And, in those days, it was traditional stuff, newspaper ads and things like that. And I was picking up these different jobs, started working for a client out of Harrisburg who had a financing package that they could give the residential owners to be able to do improvements to their homes electrically, like new service entrances and things. And so over a number of years, developed a nice clientele. I'd get up in the morning. I'd go, meet up with a couple electricians, do work on an office building, and by 7:30 I'd break while they kept working, and I'd go to class and take my 8 o'clock exam, and so those two businesses I ran for a number of years.
That business that you marketed, and how did you have what did you do money-wise? Did you go get financing, or did you have someone support you, or did you have some savings from the training school business that you had? How did you get the money to market that business?
Credit cards.
Huh.
Right. Unfortunately, I never had a lot of just good old fashioned guerrilla marketing too. Like I just never had, I haven't really come from any money. I don't have, Uncle Joe that's going to throw me some cash. Never have, never will. I had great support from my mom and things like that. Her belief in me to be able to do that. Hey mom, I have this idea. She'd say, I believe in you, son. That was enough for me. I'll figure out how to get the money from somebody else, and whether that be Joe Company, Uncle Joe, the credit card company. And, so I just, tried to make nickels into dimes, learned how to do the accounting myself, learned how to do the graphic design myself, learned how to do all the elements that you needed, come up with logos. I did all that myself.
Now, at that time, you're still at State College. Were you at Penn State for 4 years, 5 years?
5.5 years.
5.5 years. So did you finish with a master's?
Yeah, I finished with my master's degree.
So you go up there for 5.5 years, you get a master's, undergrad and master's, while starting and running two businesses.
Yeah.
These are the kind of stories that our listeners need to hear. Entrepreneurs often have started this way. It's similar to mine, where you just tried things that you knew a little bit about and you were passionate about, and you got better at them, turned them into businesses. Some of them were enough to make some money on them. Others made enough that you could hand it off to this place in Wilkes-Barre. So interesting stuff. So now you finally are done. You're now, like, say 12, 13 years out of high school, and you've got the 7 great years of experience in the military where you learned leadership, you learned the technical aspect of the submarine. You then come out and you get your undergrad and your master's while forming two businesses. What happens then?
So I knew that I'd have to work for 3 years minimum, most likely 4 years, to be able to get my professional engineering license, which would allow me to practice in the state. And so while I was doing that and working for a couple engineering firms and architecture firms, just design firms in general, and getting that experience, I started a movie store, rental store. And so during this time period, I'd be, my wife will kill me but I met my wife in college, and she's my partner in crime. So she's very entrepreneurial herself. So, she's the brains behind the operation. And I'm not just saying that because, but she is. I mean, anybody who knows my wife knows that, she's as hardworking as anybody. She understands risk. She's also able to solve things. And so the reality is that while I was running those businesses and I was fumbling my way through accounting and marketing and stuff like that, when I met my wife and she figured out, what I was doing and what I spent my time doing, she wanted to be part of that. She figured out how to do accounting the right way. She spent time learning the software to do better graphics, better, marketing. She taught me a lot of the classes I had in college. So I would come home at night, maybe from a job, and she'd say, okay, this is what we covered in class today. And she would tutor me. And so she was my partner in crime, from literally the day, that we started spending time together. And then obviously that developed into a marriage, and we have kids now and all this other stuff. But, she was and is my biggest supporter that way, and really has helped close the gaps on things where I was just kind of a brute force guy. So I would just like, I'm going to do it, but it might not be good. She would make it good. So when I started the movie rental store, she was like, "What?" And I'm like, "Hey, like I got this energy, and I'm not an 8 to 5 guy, and I'll put in 12 hours a day at the companies I was working for. And I did take as much work as I could possibly get because I knew that as soon as I would get my professional engineering license, I was going to start a company in buildings. That was my ultimate goal. So I figured, well, in this next 3 or 4 years, I better do everything I can to build my reputation, continue to learn business skills. So open up a retail environment, which, I go back and say, man, I learned a ton. One, I don't like retail. Two, I mean, dealing with the general public is not an easy thing, but I learned all about in a retail is completely different experience. And it was a successful operation. It happened right before On Demand and all that stuff came in and just wiped out Blockbuster and Hollywood Video, and all those companies got destroyed from the On Demand. But so it was just a local retail movie rental store on Mount Washington called Movies on the Mount. And it was a great experience. And she would help with that. So we learned how to buy suppliers and, do all those things, get licensing in the state, all the incorporations, all that kind of stuff that you have to do to have an enterprise. So, we went through that experience. Concurrently, I wrote some papers, some technical papers and things like that. I got involved in organizations as much as I could, technical organizations and things like that to, build up my credibility. Because I knew soon as I would go into the market and start AE Works, that I would be the new guy. And I've only been in engineering 4 years. So, I didn't have gray hair then. And I knew that to sell the business, to be able to get customers, that I had to be able to have a body of work. So I figured, well, in 4 years, I'm just going to go like crazy and work, my time inside the business, making sure I do good work for my employers who gave me the opportunity. Then I'm going to work at night. And I'm going to work at night on my business. And, I had that retail environment. So I was learning kind of the business skill piece. And then I was going to organizations and doing all this other stuff. And, I'm a relationship guy. So, today, Joanne in my office, my first employee at the retail store at the Movies on the Mount was her younger brother. And, I hired him because he was coming in, hanging around my store all the time. And he was driving me crazy, to be honest. So I was like, if you're going to be here all the time, I'm going to make you work. So I hired him. And then I met her through that, and Joanne's been with me over 9 years. So, I say the best thing ever came out of the Movies on the Mount was Joanne, and that relationship with Emilio and their family. So I started AE Works in 2007, literally right after I got my license.
Again, we're with Mike Cherock of AE Works. He's gone through his career path and story, and now he's to where he has AE Works. And AE Works is a different type of architectural firm in that it's architectural and engineering, and it's been recognized as such. And it also has something called the triple bottom line, and that is actually even tied to your logo. Tell us the story about those two.
So, culture, what the business stands for, to me is as important as what the business does. And so we were, we started off, it didn't happen right away. I call the first couple years in business, there's survival. It's just kind of just get down and get dirty and get into the game and, fight your way through it to establish yourself. So, the first couple years I was really focused in on, clients, get clients, get work. And of course, 2008, 9, everybody knows what happened then. I'm thinking, oh man, but it turns out to be a blessing in disguise. I'm willing to go where the work is, work harder than the next guy, to make that kind of commitment. So that taught me a lot. And in those first couple of years, that was the focus. But as we started to establish ourselves and hire people and start to scale, it became apparent to me, not by my own recognition, but by people who worked for the company, some of which still work at the company to this day, that the organization has to stand for something. We need to have some kind of identity beyond just what it is we provide. And so I go to work. That's what I do. When people come up with good ideas and my staff have the best ideas, I go to work and try to find what those what's out there. So as I started researching that, and I did a series of personal visioning exercises internally at the company, where this came to light. This idea of the company having an identity. In my research, I discovered triple bottom line companies, triple bottom line businesses, and companies that are not just for profit, but they're for good. And so as I started researching that and trying to get some scholarship on that subject, I would engage with my staff, and we started going through some training. And just so happened at that time in 2012, June 4th, 2012 to be exact, there was a day that the company, it was like the worst day professionally I've ever had, where the company, financially kind of flipped. There were a lot of things going on I wasn't aware of. And that day, which I can remember, I have in my calendar as a constant reminder, was the most evident to me of how valuable that culture is, how valuable what you stand for is as compared to what you provide. And I had not addressed it. I was doing some research around it, but it was not full force. And so after that day and in the months ahead, I worked, my ass off to make sure that we didn't lose the business and I wouldn't disappoint so many people and the people who were working hard in the company. I got rid of those people in the company, to be blunt, who were, contributors to the kind of chaos that was ensuing. But most importantly, I worked on myself and worked on what it is that, my role is and what it is I should be doing as a CEO of the company. And I made a pledge to my staff then that I keep to this day, which is that I will always own the culture. And by that, I mean that I'm responsible for that. So if you find yourself working in an environment at AE Works that you're not proud of, I need to know that. We need to discuss it. I may not agree with it. People do come and go. Not everybody's a fit for companies. They work a couple years. Maybe they're not the right, but we're going to have an honest conversation. And at the end of the day, if it's wrong, I own it. And if it's right, I own it, and then I'm not looking to shed that or give that to somebody or delegate that. And I think every CEO of any company, every founder, everybody who runs companies owns that culture. And it's not something you can delegate,
And when you realize something's amiss and you go, oh, look what I've created. Because that's what I've gone through multiple times. I'm going through right now is you go, oh, so I've created this issue with communication because I was signaling that somehow unintentionally. And so you're right. We have to own it.
We own it. And I think that in the process of coming to that realization, I said, okay, well, how do you define it? You can say it, but how do you define your culture? How do you define it? Well, you define it through your business model. You define it through your core values and your mission statement, vision statements, things like that. And a lot of companies have those because some business school said you're supposed to do that. Okay. And that's fine. But, I don't like to just do things because I'm supposed to. I've never really made it. My whole life is kind of against that. So I've always thought about what's right, and then let's do that. Whether you're supposed to or not, right's right, And so we said, okay, well, let's go out and figure out this business model. And it turned out that we believe that the triple bottom line business model gives us the best representation of what kind of culture we want. And it supports that kind of culture. And so what the triple bottom line business is, for those who may not know, is that you look at a company and you say, okay, we have profit. So that's one bottom line. That's the one everybody knows, right?
Yeah, because if you don't do that one, you don't hang around long.
Yeah, right. And the great Peter Senge, who's somebody that I've studied under from Harvard, he's kind of a well-known thought leader in businesses, said that profit is like oxygen for businesses, but unfortunately too many businesses think that breathing is the only reason to exist.
His book, The Learning Organization.
The Fifth Discipline.
And The Fifth Discipline Learning Organization. Man, that changed me.
Yeah,
We'll
absolutely.
put that in the show notes. Peter Senge.
The fifth discipline should be required reading for. Yeah, I mean, he has a number of books out there.
That's the one. I've probably read 3 of his books. That one is outstanding.
You know, and I've had the opportunity to meet him a couple times and go to some of his workshops, and you know, he just really, you know, I think put into you know, what people feel he put into you know, a system and a methodology and a thought, you know, critical thinking, you know, behind that, to be able to, you know, actually develop business models and processes in companies to express.
So that's the first bottom line. And
so the first bottom line.
Okay, so the second one is?
Second bottom line is social. So social is, you know, community, right? So the interactions of, you know, people, whether it be, you know, social fields, not to sound academic, but that's what they're called, which is, could be the social field within a project team. It could be the social field, you know, within the community itself, like the city of Pittsburgh. What is that social fabric of the city of Pittsburgh? And so you're mindful of that bottom line, that you're doing, your company is contributing positively to the social fabric, both internally, like I said, in project teams, but also in your community. And even, you know, you can think larger. You can have large aspirations, global aspirations, you know, like thinking about how do we do work that improves the social fabric of the world, right? And so that's the second bottom line, if you will. And historically, that has been taken up by government, right, and NGOs that are charged with that. That, you know, making sure that society and the people within it are nobody's left behind. But as a for-profit business, we can think like that, right? We can help government do their job better. We can do it on our own. Nonprofits spend a lot of time in that arena. We're not nonprofits, and I can get into some of the technical challenges of running a triple bottom line company, but we can think about that. And so at AE Works, like, we do things like sponsor nonprofits to help, you know, furnish apartments for female veterans that are in crisis, that are homeless, so we can help combat homelessness for veterans. And we can do that as a for-profit company. In social, the way we break it underneath, just to kind of finish up on the social, is we define it as fun. So like AE Works say, you're going to have fun, damn it. Fun, fit, and forward. So fit, healthy. Right, so a healthy society is an important one. A healthy company is important, and then paying it forward is, you know, kind of the community work and things like that. Just recently, it was very touching. I just received literally yesterday a little package of just a couple of thank yous from Amachi Pittsburgh. So a couple years ago, I was contacted by the leader of Amachi Pittsburgh, and what they do is they help the children of incarcerated people. You know. And it's a gap in society. Nobody's taking care of the children who have parents who are incarcerated. And so Amachi Pittsburgh's doing that. And we were contacted by them because they know that we're active and we want to help in the community. And so what do? We help them with their office, in their new office, you know, to be able to, so they can do what they do better through a better office. So that's the social aspect. That's the second bottom line. The third bottom line is what we call eco. And eco is, you know, what a lot of people think of in terms of like environmental. So, you know, like buildings, for example, which is what we create through design and oversight. Buildings take a lot of natural resources. So good buildings, and everyone's aware of like green buildings and doing sustainable building and all that. And that's part of our eco as well. But we also like to think of it in terms of governance. So, you know, eco is what kind of structures are you putting in place inside the company to be able to govern. So people inside AE Works, staff members inside AE Works, participate in things like stay of the company, stay of the industry, all hands meetings. Every employee at AE Works is aware of and briefed on the strategic plan. People have an ability to open up eco projects, open up social projects, in addition to the technical projects that we do that, you know, give us a full kind of project arsenal, if you will, of a triple bottom line company. That's what it is.
That's Mike Cherock of AE Works, the company that is a triple bottom line company. Hear more of my conversation with Mike on the next episode of the No BS Marketing Show.